Hello dreamers, welcome again to Night Terrain. Today is going to be about painting, but first, if you watched some of my last videos, then you'll know how to make cardboard terrain tiles. You're going to want to make about 32 of these tiles. 32 will make you a good set to build just about any size map. You're going to want to paint them all the same. So if you want stone floors, you'll paint 32 tiles of stone floor. I've painted several different sets, and one of the sets that I've painted is a wood floor tile set. And I wanted to remind you that I no longer use cardboard to build tiles. Now I use foam board for certain reasons we'll get into in future videos. If you have access to foam board, I would suggest waiting until then, and you can always come back to this video for painting tips. Once you have a set, you will paint one layer on all 32 tiles, and then come back and do the next layer on all 32 tiles. That way, they'll all match. Today I'm going to paint the 8 cardboard tiles I made in the last video, but I'll paint each one differently just to get your imagination flowing. These tiles will not be part of my Baldur's Gate build. Use your imagination and see what you can make. When painting any terrain, always remember to paint in layers. The more layers, the better. One thing I do to start is where the walls are, I like to use some black paint and make the shadow of the wall. Here you can see my wet palette I have from our previous video, and I'm going to start off with the black like I said and just paint along the walls. This will make a nice cast shadow from the walls, and as I get away from the walls I go lighter. I'm going to paint like this on all of these tiles. The cardboard tile without any walls has lettering from the cardboard, and I'm going to want to cover that up. So I'll go ahead and paint that tile completely black. I can always lighten it up later if I want. Now for the corner piece. Now you notice I made kind of an arch here. Now that that's done, we can start on the next layer. I'm going to start off by mixing a darkish red color. I've decided to start on the double walled piece. It's kind of like a hallway, and I thought it would make a good alleyway. So right now I'm picking the right brush, smaller brush, and I'm just going to start off by painting little bricks. Now the whole key to this is illusion. You just want to make the illusion of bricks, or whatever you're painting. It doesn't have to be perfect. Role-playing games are theater of the mind. And you want to remember that when you're painting. You want to leave some details out just so that people can use their imagination. Now that I've got the first layer on the bricks done, I'm going to move on and show you how to make simple stone work on your cardboard tiles. For stones, just randomly use different size shapes and always start off with a darker gray. You can come back and add highlights later. I try not to go in a straight line. I try to vary where I'm putting my rocks. Just kind of work all over the place. Go back and forth. If you go in a straight line, you'll end up with more of a grid. And there's the completed stonework. Next, I'm going to mix up a brown. It's not too light. It is light enough to show up, but not too light. And I decided I wanted a wood floor. And so I'm just going to make wood floor slats. Like I said, nothing has to be perfect. This is one of the first coats of paint, one of the first layers. And I just go through and add a bit. There we go. Now for some fun. We're going to use some plaster. I like to use these old lids. Oops, plaster in my coffee. So you're going to need plaster, some glue, and one of these things. Some of these will come in your paintbrush packages. And you just mix enough glue in with your plaster. You want the consistency somewhere between biscuit gravy and toothpaste. Once you get it all mixed up, you're just going to want to spread it on a tile like you're icing a cake. One thing you can do is you can fill in the corrugation on the edges of the cardboard. This is a great way to add textured detail to any of your tiles. Make sure to wash your hands. So I'm going to flip the paintbrush around and use the back end of it. While the plaster is still wet, I'm going to shape some stonework. So it'll be similar to the last tile, only this one will have actual looking stones in it. You can see everywhere I scrape off the plaster is the black background. Here's another neat little trick. Take some glue and smear it on a tile. And sprinkle it with plaster. Just dry plaster. This will give you some texture. Now something else I use sometimes is a Sharpie. I'm going to go back in and go around all the wood slats. Another layer. Make sure that your paint's dry if you use a Sharpie. Sharpies do not like wet paint. I'm also going to fill in the lines around the brickwork. This is gesso. It's a primer for acrylic paints. It's really white, so I like to use it for highlights. I'm using a natural sponge just to add some highlights to the stonework that we did before. There we go. Now I'm going to use this brush and I'm going to show you a dry brushing technique. You want to take most of the paint off your brush before you try this. Now I'm going to brush along the wood slats here, and that'll put a little bit of grain work in the wood. I'm just barely going over the surface. Now I'm going to mix up some lighter red, and I'm going to put some highlights into each one of the bricks. There. Looks like most of our plaster is dry. Time to add some gray. And you can just slop this on. There's my sponge. I'm going to take one little square of toilet paper. I'm going to wet it down. Make sure it's nice and wet. And I'm going to wrap it around my sponge. Now I'm going to add some PVA glue to it. Just make sure it's coated really well. Oops, I missed a spot. I'll add another small piece. Now I'm going to put some PVA glue on my tile and put this where I want it. Now here's another little piece of toilet paper. I'm just going to water it up, put a little bit of water and glue on it, make almost like a little spitball with it, and glue it to this tile. Then we'll let that dry. This one's all dry. Time to add some gray. This can just be slopped on there. Easy peasy. Now, a lot of people like to use grids. I don't use grids on my terrain. Usually 1 inch stands for 5 feet. So some people like grids. This is an easy way to make grids. Do each inch of the piece a different stone. Here I am marking out the stonework. I made each stone a little bit different color, and I'm going back and making shadows in it, and I'll put some little white highlights in there as well. Time for our wash. If you watch the previous videos, you'll know how to make a wash. This will get down in the grooves and highlight everything.
Several song-filled hours later.
Now my stonework is dry. So these are going to turn out to be rocks, and so I want to coat them with some nice dark gray. And this can just be slopped on there. It doesn't have to be pretty. It's a rock. Now, I'm going to add some plaster to it, just dry. Just kind of dab it on there. This will give your stonework some nice texture. And as soon as you dab it onto the wet paint, you can grab some more paint and just add it on top. Or you could let it dry for a while and then come back and paint it. Oh, I missed a spot. I'm going to add another piece of toilet paper on there and then let this, and add some more PVA glue. A lot of PVA glue this time. It wasn't sticking very well. Now it will. And we'll let that dry. And I'll come back tomorrow to finish it all out.
Day 2.
So now the stone is all dry. I need to repaint this part. You can see I created a new wet palette for this day. And here goes. I decided to go a little bit darker this time. And I'm just going to cover it all. Once again, I'm just slapping it on there. I'm not trying to make it pretty. But I do want good coverage. And we'll set that aside to let it dry. Now these remaining 2 tiles, I want to lighten up the center again. And I go back and forth on them a little bit, using a little bit of water. Now, I wanted to show you that you can make mosaic tile floors. And all you do is take your paint and make a bunch of little tiny dots on there. Geometric shapes will work best to make a tile floor, but I decided to make a little dragon inset and little tiles on the floor. And so I'm just doing a bunch of different colored dots all over the place. Now my dragon doesn't show up very well, so I decided to outline it with some blue. Later on, I'll come back and darken up the tiles along the sides of the walls and leave the tiles in the center nice and bright. Now I'm adding some highlights to the stonework. And I'm just using straight white for this. Now I decided I want this one a little bit more beige. Now you notice I covered up the black along close to the walls, so I'm going to come back and add some more black in there. And maybe a little bit of white to the very corner tip. And some more brown in the center. Until I get a nice, smooth transition. There. Now I decided this might be in a wizard tower or something, so I just want blue and green tiles on this. Notice I go all the way to the edge, so I'm going to have to come back and add my shadows in. Now for the green tiles. There, blue and green tiles. Now we're going to use another one of our washes. I decided to cover our new stone or boulder in the ground with this wash. This will make it look like dirt. And we'll let that dry. Here we go with the black wash. Now I'm covering these mosaic tiles and adding a little bit of black to the shadows. Letting the tiles show through most of it. There we go. Here's that stonework. This stonework needs some highlights. This is the dry brushing technique. You really want very little paint on your brush. I went over it with a little bit of tan one direction, and a little bit of white the opposite direction. There, that looks better. Now, I'm using the same dry brushing technique. You want to make sure you don't have very much paint at all on your brush. And just barely go over the very tips and edges of your work. And now we'll wash it all. Oh, first I want to add a pathway. I'm adding some tan to the pathway. Now I'm washing it. Take a crayon and scrape it on some 80 grit sandpaper onto a piece of paper. This will give you a bunch of little tiny chunks that we'll use later. Take a little bit of hemp string, measure it to your mini, cut it off, put a dab of hot glue on the end of it. Just make sure it's where you want it. Pull it back off and separate all the strands. After you get all the strands separated, you can paint it. I paint mine green. Then I just kind of trim it up, make it look like a nice little bush. Put a little bit of PVA glue down, tap the very tips of it in the PVA, and then tap it into your crayons. There. Now we have some little flowers. Add some hot glue to the end again and stick it on your train. Now I'm just separating all the little bristles and stuff a little bit, fluffing it out. Ta-da! Instant flowers. And I'm going to add some grass. And I'll cover up any of the hot glue that was showing on the bottom. Just some green paint will make nice looking grass. I'm going to highlight the trail. A little bit of tan. There we go. Nice stone and flowers. Now for some more wash. Come back and cover up the darkness on this tile. Remember layers. Layers is going to be your friend on doing any painting on this terrain. Now I want to add some grout in where the light's hitting in between these tiles. And I don't want to go into my shadows. Then I added some darkness, some shadows. All that's left now is the walls. I like to start my walls off with some white. I like to make sure that all the walls are covered with white. Walls usually look better if they're lighter colored than your tiles. They'll show up a lot more once all your tiles are put together, and they'll distinguish. You'll be able to tell where the walls are and where they're not. I prefer these kind of walls because your minis don't run into them when you're trying to move your minis around on the board. On the wood floor, I just like to do a simple tan wash on top of the wall. It'll make it look like a plaster wall with wooden floors. Here I'm mixing up some gray. This will serve as grout in the brick wall. Now I think the rest of them will look good with stone walls, and so I go ahead and use a darker gray for these. By the time I get through with this last one, the first one I started on will be ready to work with. So for the bricks, I just mix up some brick red, lighter than the bricks in the alleyway, and I just paint little squares on there. Next, I just make some indications that these are large stones on this wall. This, I decide, needs to just have square brick walls, like a castle wall. These last two are probably owned by a wizard or something, so I make the walls a little different. This one I put a bunch of angles on. Now, I'm going to come back to the bricks and add some shadow, and I'll come back later and add some highlights. There we go. All the shadows and highlights make this one done. And here's all of our finished pieces. Not bad for just some corrugated cardboard. This is something that'll be fun and easy to do with your kids. Great for any scenario. A big change from the simple cardboard. That's all for this one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.